Hello and welcome back to the Google Hangout inside Sitecore 7, where we meet with our developers behind 7 to learn about the new features, ask some questions, and interact with the team behind 7. Today we're going to talk about the releases we've had since we've last spoken. We've had 7.1 and 7.2 launched, and it has been a while, so we wanted to take some time to review each one in detail. Any questions that you have, please send them on to #Sitecore7. We'll be responding as we go through. The recording, of course, will be made available on YouTube after the Hangout. So with that, we're going to introduce the team, starting with Mr. Alex Shiba, joining us in California.
Hello.
And welcome back, Kieran, joining us from Bristol, UK.
Hello.
And from Copenhagen, hello, Martin. It sounds like you might need to do a mic check quick.
Yeah. Hey, I just turned on my mic.
There we go. And hello, Stephen.
Hello.
And finally, Tim Ward. So again, we're going to be reviewing 7.1 and 7.2 today, and leading us off is Stephen with an introduction.
Right then. So exactly to the day 1 year ago, Sitecore 7 launched on the 21st of May. So we had a little cake with a candle. We could celebrate that. But since then, we've been rolling out lots of updates and new versions and rolling in lots of features and constantly working on improving the kind of Sitecore 7 experience, mainly around search, but lots of exciting other things in there. If we look at the timeline very quickly, you can see, if you go to the next slide, Tim, you can see a lovely timeline which shows us progression of Sitecore 7. So we're currently on update 5 for Sitecore 7.0, update 2 for 7.1, and update 1 for 7.2. So we'll go through each one of these and show all the different features that have been added, and then the rest of the guys will dip into the sort of highlights of each release, and we'll be able to get an understanding of the cool new features that we've all got in here. So if we go to the next one, we'll talk about first about Sitecore 7. So really the updates 1 and 2 that we did immediately after the main release were fixing all of the bugs from the MVP early rollout and the initial release, tidying up the API, getting rid of unneeded classes, and generally bringing the consistency between Solar and Lucene further into line. So we were fixing lots of UX elements and making sure our controls all worked. So it was a very large release for us, just getting all those things in check. With the introduction of Sitecore 7.1, you get to go and play with the Speak framework, which Tim is going to talk about in a moment. So that's a really big step forward for us in terms of the old Shear framework now moving to the Speak framework, and we'll see improvements to the UI framework as Sitecore progresses even further into the future. There was a very large rules engine enhancements which made the rules engine much easier to deal with, and Kieran's going to go into some of the extra features in the rules engine. We started to distribute the item web API within Sitecore. It's been a big part of the product now, and people are using the web API to access Sitecore items remotely. So it's a very key part of the project, and in future versions that will be updated even further now. And continuing Sitecore's MVC support, we support MVC4 in this version and MVC5 in a later version, and generally we increase the browser compatibility with this one as well. There's a lot of work for IE and Firefox compatibility. So 7.2. So Alex and Kieran and myself worked on a large amount of publishing improvements. Alex is going to talk about those in a moment, and then I think there's going to be a separate hangout just because of the depth of the features that depth of the improvements that were done. 7.2 also meant that there was a Speak UI framework update, adding more components, really sort of broadening the scope of what you can actually create with the Speak framework. Really good stuff, and what they call the business component library, which is a set of sort of standardized components for when you're building your applications. There was a good deal ongoing throughout all of these around content search, around item buckets, and around improvements to both the Lucene and the Solar providers. The document factory being a very large one, and I think Martin will touch on that later in the talk. And then some other stuff to do with Solar HTTP caching to really improve the performance of your sort of Solar solutions in there. Now we have multivariate testing that can be configured per language, which is a largely sort of requested feature, and then obviously including support for Internet Explorer 11 and then MVC 5.1. So constant progress, lots of new features to play with, and the guys will now go into each of those kind of highlighted features and give you a lot more detail about what you can get your hands on. So Tim's going to talk about Speak now.
Okay, good segue. As you may have noticed, Sitecore is changed a lot of its branding, and we're definitely embracing the new branding ourselves by producing our own marketing photos. I hope you enjoy them. Now, this is an example of something that kind of goes against what we've typically been doing in this Hangouts, and that is that a lot of the stuff that you have been shown, you know, we all worked on and developed. And this is an example where this is something that we didn't actually speak was something that this team didn't build ourselves. However, definitely we're all starting to use it a lot more on later versions of Sitecore that will be coming out soon. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over a quick overview of, you know, not exactly what Speak is, because I think that's too I think that's we're a bit past that now, but just you know, what's in it and what's to come. And I've got some really exciting news to discuss for future Hangouts as well. So first of all, Sitecore Speak, the things I'm going to just talk about are the control list. So what are the control libraries that Stephen mentioned before? What's available? What updates and fixes came in 7.1 and 7.2? And this is the thing that I'm really excited about. We were able to get Jakob and Pierre, who did a lot of the development on Speak and the architecture and the initial versions and multiple versions of Speak. And they're going to come on to, I think, our next Hangout, and they'll be able to take you through some really in-depth things, and I think everyone's really excited about that, because we can kind of, not only us working, you know, we're all kind of working with Speak now, but you know, it'll give us a chance to kind of talk to the guys about what their thought processes were and what the design decisions, and you know, how we're doing common things. They'll also be going through a lot of the vision of what's coming in later Speak versions, and I'll try to cover off a little bit about my experiences with working with Speak so far. The interesting thing with Speak is that internally, all future products from Sitecore, all the product teams, and including all the guys on the Hangout today, we're building everything in Speak. So every UI addition that we're now making to the content editor or the page editor or the launchpad, they're all Speak apps. So we're not starting any new applications and building sheer components and sheer dialogues. We're all embracing the Speak framework, and so that's, I guess, reassuring and exciting for everyone that's wanting to use it, that all our products are definitely being based off the Speak framework. Also, just give you a couple of hints to some documentation and help of how to get started or even do some more advanced things in Speak, and then touch on unit testing with Speak, which is an interesting one. This is one that came up with a project that we're working on, and obviously internally at Sitecore, we're wanting to unit test all of the extra controls that we're adding or changes that we're making to controls within Speak, so I'll go through a bit of that as well. So Doing things a little bit differently, we're going to talk about Speak from our perspective, from what we found from delving into it. And first of all, I think that the first thing I found important to know that Speak is it's a framework and it's an accelerator. So the whole design idea, talking to the guys, was that it would be able to speed up the way that you could build applications within Sitecore. And they really fall into three main applications so far, and that's dashboards, lists, and task pages. And all the guys on the call on future projects for Sitecore 7.5 and 8 have been using Speak to build these types of UIs. And from my experience, most of the apps actually do easily fall into one of these three pages. I know it can kind of sound limited to only have those three types, but it's a kind of uncanny how when you look at it, really they do fall into those categories. An example of Speak, if you haven't noticed it so far, if you've installed 7.1 or 7.2, the media library has been revamped. And the interesting thing, when we were working with the Jakob and Pierre on the integration between the media library and the content search stuff, it was really interesting to note that really the front end binding between the front end and the back end, it was quite simple. In essence, the guys had a media library back end controller, and all that really did was just take a query and convert it into a link query. Those guys ended up using the predicate builder. If you've had a bit of experience with the content search, which just used a string that would be passed through a JSON call, and they would be able to parse it up and use the predicate builder to build an actual iQueryable. I'm not going to say exactly what it is, but just as a teaser, if you've been using the predicate builder in 7.5, look out for some new changes that we're going to add. A really cool feature which allows you to easily solve the transition from client and converting it into a link query. So as I said before, all the projects starting on Sitecore 8 and 7.5, all new UI changes are using Speak. We're definitely embracing that from a product perspective, and you know, it's from what my experience with it, it's really bridging that idea of creating apps exactly like a Sitecore website. So, of course, with the sheer framework, you used to bind an item to one layout, and that one layout would be an XML file that would sit on the system. And doing things like breaking down the different into different controls, the XML files got a little bit monolithic sometimes and a little bit hard to test. So it's really nice that we're embracing the Sitecore way of building sites, and then the Sitecore way of building apps are very, very, very similar. So the Sitecore Speak controls that you have today to play with, there's a big charting library that's out there right now. And if you just open Visual Studio and have a look at the ASP.NET controls that you get out of the box, they're all there. Lists, repeaters, grids, tables, they're all there. And there's lots more coming. So as we all build new products, we're building new Speak components. Some things that I can speak for, no pun intended, potentially, is some carousels, some image carousels that are very rich in aesthetic looks, things like mega drop downs and things that really we're starting to require in some of our newer products. If you want help with Speak, hit the SDN forums. Go on YouTube, because Jakob put together a big list of YouTube videos which are super handy. There's this one that pretty much got my head around Speak straight away. There was a jQuery knob thing, which was like you would turn it and then put up the values, and it showed you how to go through the whole process. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's the documentation on the SDN.
I'll second the endorsement for his YouTube videos. They're incredibly helpful. We used it for another example that's on the marketplace, the campaign launch app. So absolutely, take a look at those videos and endorsement. They're incredibly helpful.
Totally. You're all right, dude. So what came in the updates? 7.2 added these controls you see on the screen right now. So a lot to do with the charts that I mentioned on the previous slide. We also updated, the guys also updated jQuery and Bootstrap versions. And because the way they're doing it with bringing in NuGet feeds for all their dependencies, that I think you'll see out of the Speak team that we'll constantly be updating to the new versions of jQuery and Bootstrap. It just makes it so much easier for them. As Stephen suggested, IE11 things, compatibility, and the support for classic app pulls. So that wasn't supported in 7.1, but now it was after this. I'm not going to talk about unit testing in too much details now because I want to pass on to the other guys, but in the Hangout with Jakob and Pierre that we have in a few weeks, if you want to know about unit testing, maybe just look up these 3 different parts before you enter that Hangout: Jasmine, Require.js, and of course Sitecore. So just maybe get over those and get a bit intimate with how they work and what they are, and the guys will be able to take you through how to set up unit tests with Speak components. So it's over to Kieran.
Very, very concentrated face there as well. Okay, so the rules engine enhancements. This is really focusing on a few things around the rules engine. Firstly, one of the main issues we were having was a lot of noise. I should probably actually say before we go on, this is available in the CMS 7.1 and up, that you'll start noticing these changes. So one of the issues that we were having with the rules engine was that there was a folder which would effectively contain what was common, and then we had segmented out sections for different rule sets. Now, you ended up with a scenario that if you wanted to introduce a rules engine field for a user, they would often end up with lots of rules that they could use, but they didn't really map into the context that they were trying to operate within. And so you ended up with lots of confusing rule sets. So one of the things that's been introduced is we've reduced that noise. You now have very focused sections that make it very clear to the user what they can interact with in the rules editor. The next thing that we're going to talk about is the visibility of those rules. There's actually a way of customizing when they will actually show up in the rules editor, aside from the tagging mechanism. And also, we've now got a new pipeline, so if everybody wants to get really nitty-gritty with things, then they can get involved with that at the end of things there. The rules cookbook has been updated. That's available on SDN, so absolutely, if you are going to be doing anything with the rules, get onto SDN and have a look, because there's lots of information in there. Okay, so reduced noise. Apologies for the poor diagram. I was trying to fit them onto the slide here. So conditions and actions. If we look on the left-hand side here, we've got a fields element, and these conditions and actions are now listed underneath there. So this allows us to reduce the kind of complexity of things. We can have multiple elements, and each element really only needs to have the conditions and actions that are related to it. And then to kind of define that relationship, we've now got the concept of tags. And so you can see a list here. We've got bucketing, campaigns, conditional renderings, etc. And these tags allow us to say these fields elements on the left-hand side, they've been tagged with the fields tag. And then finally, what we have here on the right is we have the concept of a rule context. And that rule context just brings lots of tags in together. So here we've got the version rules. We can see at the bottom that's been highlighted. And the default set of tags has got a long list of things, but in there is also the fields tag. And so what will actually happen here is that when the rules editor is used, and we assign the rule context of validation rules or insert options, whatever we want, it's the data source. What we'll be able to do is bring in all those rules that have been tagged with the variety of fields, item attributes, etc. And that collection of fields, sorry, that collection of rules, conditions, actions, they'll all be available in the rule editor. And the big thing is that this will make sense. This will be a reduced, focused set of rules. And so again, if you're defining your own rule sets, if you're going to be trying to make it simpler for editors to only choose 1 or 2 things at a time, just create your own rule context, create your own tags, and drop in rules, conditions onto those things there instead. The next thing we can do is we can customize the visibility of these tags. And this is really good for such things as we've got here GRIP and analytics. If you've got a scenario that a certain feature needs to be enabled for those tags, for those rules and conditions to make sense, if you've got a certain case where only certain users should be allowed to use certain rules and those kinds of things, what we can do is we can add in a visibility rule, and this can be added at a tag or an element level. And then that visibility rule will get run during the process of selecting what rules can be added. And again, we'll kind of reduce and limit down to what's being allowed for the user to access. So again, here we've got it for the GRIP rule. And obviously that rule only makes sense if analytics is enabled. So there's just a simple check there to check one of the Sitecore settings. And then finally what we have is the getRenderedRuleElements pipeline. And this has been introduced, and this will just step through the stage in 3 processes, really. We've got a processor to check the rule context. followed by a processor to check the tags that have been assigned to that rule context, and then finally a processor that will actually get all the elements, the rule conditions, etc., and they're the ones that will actually be used in the rules editor itself. The important thing to note about this processor, this pipeline, is that because it goes through the kind of 3 simple steps, what actually happens is as it goes through, the processor calls through to its base class, and that will actually trigger off the visibility rules for those as well. So if you're going to be extending this, the kind of a complex side of it of triggering off the rule sets afterwards to validate whether they're visible, etc., that's been done. So you can just quickly extend it and get running with things. And that's really it for the rule structure. FillDB enhancements.
I'm tempted not to leave to move from this one though. So
it's the complexity of weasels over time. It confuses Steve.
Can you remember the points? Because I can just stay on this if you want, Kieran.
I might be able to bring them up. Hang on a minute. I've got a set.
Always so sad about those weasels.
Welcome back, Steve.
Okay, so FillDB enhancements. This is relating to CMS 7.2 and up. What we've actually introduced is a much more flexible FillDB page. What was previously there was pretty good out of the box. It could get you running with a quick index check. It could spawn up a few 100,000 million items, whatever you wanted to chuck at it. It would stick them in the database into an index, and you could quickly test just to see how performance was going. What we've done now is we've actually made it a little bit more secured, because obviously there was a possibility of it just being open-ended when you first installed Sitecore. The optional steps now give greater flexibility, so if you wanted to just run it a few times to create items of different template types, you can do that now. And finally, it's been automated as well, so it's just been made into a simple postable page, so now you can actually send over all the parameters from a simple command line. If you're running TeamCity and you want to spin up an instance and just quickly generate items, you can do that quite simply from some build steps there as well. There's a blog post written up for this already that's just came out a couple months ago, and that's on the FillDB updates link you can see on the page there as well. So if we just have a look, secureable, really simple. Previously, I think when we first kind of looked at this, we were going to have a control within the page that you had to go and set, but instead we've moved it out into a setting in the cycle.buckets config. So the nice little thing that I could do with this now is we can create a folder called debug. We can put that into our include folder, and then we can drop in our config changes into there. And of course, then when we're doing a buildable release or anything, we can make sure we ignore the debug folder. And so in those scenarios, with this config in place, we will have the FillDB page enabled. But when we get to a release scenario, we know it's not going to be enabled as well. The optional steps, I'll show you the page briefly in a second to give you a more clearer understanding of what there are. But we can now change the database we want to generate items in. So if you have your own database, for example, that's quite useful to populate. We can change the location of the stored Word files. Some people might prefer to put them into the Sitecore's temporary folders location instead. We can generate and download Word files for you. Sorry, I shouldn't say generate there. We can download Word files for you. We always suggest Gutenberg.org, sorry, for free ebooks because they're text-based and rather simple. One thing, the demo gods have killed me for this, but if you go to there too often and you run the script too quickly, they will actually block you for 24 hours for downloading files too many times. So yeah, you can always just put your own text files into that location as well if you needed to. As well as that, we can now obviously clear caches. We can alter the name of the items that are being created. We can specify the number of items to generate, the words per field, all these kinds of things as well. And also the benefits we have at the end there are rebuilding the indexes. So this is also quite a handy way if you just want to rebuild the index without having to go into Sitecore. You can actually just fire off a quick execution to the page itself. And then finally, the automation, I'll give you a quick little demo of this in a second. As I said, all the parameters can now be posted, so this is just nice and quick. You can obviously just chuck it into Fiddler, or you can use Postman, or anything else you want to use on those scenarios. It gives you a really quick way just to test stuff and indexes for performance, or if you just want to generate some rubbish lorem ipsum items and those kind of things, you can just do that as well. And then we've just added on a little JSON flag, so if you're using it from a command line, it's normally easier to handle a JSON object, especially if you're in PowerShell or anything else, and so we can just output those details there. And in this scenario, you can see the information being returned. We get one line per step to say what's happened, and it's the same messages that you would receive on the page itself as well. And again, we've got an example script for this, so that's available with the bit.ly link there as well. So if I just quickly give you a demo. Sorry, this is going to show my screen for a second.
Extra points for being bold. Nice.
Well, as I said, you can see here's my error 403 from Gutenberg.org. Thanks, guys. That was really useful. So we've got a little gist there. That's got the FillDB example script that's written in PowerShell. It's very noisy just because it has lots of comments in there as well, but you absolutely don't need to use this. You can just run it off from a simple curl script, anything else you want to do there. And so if I go to my FillDB page, we've actually now got a much clearer step process. We've got a few defaults filled in for us. So we've got the master database at the top here being used. Just zoom in a little bit. We've got the database script that's used to prepare things. We've got the files that we suggest for downloading from Gutenberg, clear site caches, the names of items we want to generate. By default, the template we're using is the normal default item that comes, sample item that comes in Sitecore, and then we've got the template fields, which are just title and summary, etc. We've got parents, so if you want to generate items in a certain place in the tree, you can absolutely do that now. And then we've also got the option to rebuild the indexes, so you can either do a specific index, you can do an index from a specific route or multiple routes as well. Just chuck information at the page there. So quick little look. So I've got my little generate script here. If I just hit F5, what's actually happening, I'm ignoring the downloads because obviously I just said that the 403 is failing there. I'm actually using a custom template for the items I want to generate. I've got 3 fields, title, summary, and description. And then I've got my site, my username, my password. I've got a prefix here, and I've got the index that I want to generate. So the first run I have here is actually firing off of all the options, basically. So I'm generating the script, I'm creating the items, I'm downloading items, etc., etc. And then the second run I have just down here, I'm actually just saying, create me another 100 items, and just prefix them with alternate instead. So just a nice little way of just saying, I just want to have other items that I can identify in some way. So we've got our feedback here on the left. That's come through quite quickly. And then if I go back to my home item, I've got my alternate items. I've got rubbish data in here at the moment because of my blocked code, but I've got my Hangout items down there as well. And if we look in this instance, they've come out on my alternate Hangout template. So that's the FillDB script. It's a lot more flexible. Hopefully it's going to be useful in terms of, as I said, build servers, and hopefully people are going to find it useful in terms of being able to just test things when they want to do things locally as well. But also generating rough items, just stubbing things out. It's really nice and simple now.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Karen. So I think we're going to go to Martin next. Is that correct?
I'll be me.
Sorry.
Alex.
Yes, for publishing improvements and enhancements. Over to you, Alex.
That's right. Thanks, Nate. Well, publishing. Publishing was this was one of the most I think common feedbacks we were getting when after we released Sitecore 7 with item buckets is how am I gonna publish 1 million items in my bucket? So this is our answer to that. So instead of just responding with what about publishing, we have now sort of solution for you. So this was one of the biggest features of 7.2. So what we took, just overall the approach that we took here, we took existing engine, publishing engine, we made it more lightweight, and we added a supercharger. So that's sort of, in a few words, to describe the approach. We haven't provided you with a new publishing engine, so it's all the same pipelines. It's a little bit more lightweight, and you have an option, you have a dial pretty much to control the parallelization of this process. So we use standard task parallel library for parallelization. Before 7.2, we had one thread running publishing process. So that was one of the things that was causing the application to be not providing great performance in publishing. So by parallelization, we are achieving much better results. And next slide, I'm gonna share some of the results we're getting. The next big feature is targeting multilingual solutions. So the approach is pretty much can be described as single shot publishing for multilingual content trees. So when you have your publishing wizard up, you toggle multiple languages. I mean, we have customers with more than 100 languages, so this is very important. So before 7.2, we had every for every language selected, there was a new publishing job created, and it was pretty much re-crawling the whole tree. And if you had a really deep tree, a lot of items, means that it pretty much was causing multiple loops to go through every item in that tree multiple times and republishing that item in a particular selected language. So instead of that, we have a single-shot process that as an item is being evaluated as publishing candidate, we processing every language version that is selected in the publishing wizard. So that reduces the time to publish multilingual trees dramatically. The next big thing was the out-of-the-box support for pre-prod publishing, and what that is ability for you to designate a publishing target as a preview publishing target, and have a special workflow action that is set to allow publishing of those items into that designated publishing target, though that workflow state is not final. So it's pretty much sort of a semi-final publishing. There's a couple of blogs out there of the approach that you can take pre-7.2. So now you have this approach available out of the box. The main scenario it's targeting is when you have a designated pre-production environment that needs to feed off a designated web database. So before the content reaches production environment, you need to sort of have maybe some offline approval, maybe to test some integration points. So you need to have that pre-prod web database out there, and this is a way for you to configure that out of the box. Related item publishing, one of the most frequently requested feature, we actually have scheduled a couple of enhancements, incremental enhancements for that feature in upcoming updates for 7.2. So that's just a way for you right now to control sort of related item publishing on demand from Publishing Wizard. So we have extracted that whole logic in a designated pipeline, which can be extended even further. So there's more and more things out of the box available for you, less customizations for you to make. And that sort of also leads into more configurations that are available out of the box. So you can, there is one config file that enables designated or dedicated publishing configuration. So if you run a dedicated publishing box, you can use that config to sort of enable only publishing related stuff and disable everything else. There is one config file for optimizations, which is a little bit experimental because it changes the behavior of some of the caches, and so this works nicely with enable parallelization, so that reduces the pressure on cache eviction, things like that. Definitely recommend it to try it out when you enable parallelization. And there's also other things we touched on. As I mentioned, we made the engine more lightweight, so there's a few fixes, optimizations we made. We especially around cache, there's a lot of work actually was put around cache, because if you imagine during a full publish of 1 million items, there was a lot of cache eviction that needed to take place, so it's more optimal than it is before. Plus, there's added thread safety for cache as well, so when your site is under pressure, the cache will be way more stable than before. Also, event queue related fixes and some cosmetic stuff around Publishing Wizard. There is more for sure, so there was a blog series on Sitecore.net, and there will be a link in the next slide where you can read more details on that. But I really wanted to touch on parallelization effects on the next slide. We have a few numbers to share. So this comes from our QA and from our solution architect. So they report around 15x to 25x performance increase. That depends on the size of your content tree, on the modes that you publish, number of languages, etc. That's pretty significant. And one of the recent tests our guys did in Asia that brought down publishing for about 18 language site from 15 minutes to about 3 minutes. So pretty significant, with about 17x increase. The way to enable that, there is a config file that is disabled out of the box that sort of patches in this setting, publishing.max degree of parallelism. It's for you that worked with TPL before, this is pretty much maps directly into TPL setting. And you can increase it depending on the number of cores you have and what kind of pressure you experience on the content management server. you can sort of, this is your dial, all right? So it's really critical for you to play with it first on in a QA environment that is sort of close to production in terms of configuration, for you to figure out what's the most comfortable setting for your solution. This is a few points from success recipe, so to speak. So you really gotta have a beefy server to make the most out of this feature, obviously. So the more cores, the better. It's highly recommended to run a dedicated publishing server. Most systems, they don't have that set up in place. So this, now we really have a reason in 7.2 for you to have that set up in place. So that would make sure that your authoring users would not be affected by, let's say, 1 million item publish operation, because CPU really, it's CPU intensive. It puts more pressure on the thread pool. So there's obviously consequences of 15 to 25x improvements. It's not magic. And there's definitely, what's changing slightly is increased database I/O. Before, it's outside of DMS, just Sitecore content databases, you probably see in SQL with all caches in place, SQL not really breathing much. So this really changes things significantly. So the database I/O is critical. The network bandwidth between database server and the publishing server becomes a factor. So make sure your environment can really handle it. It's set up properly to for you to achieve success in this thing. And just to conclude, I really wanted to show you this little setup I got going. So change this camera just to brag a little bit. I have two laptops designated for a little test. So on the left, I have SQL Server. It's a designated SQL box with SSDs, pretty beefy, with 8-core machines, 16 gigs of RAM. And on the right side, it's a web server machine. So as you, the publishing wizard is finished. Right now, I started it just a few minutes after the Hangout started, and it shows it's published 1 million items. So that's just pretty magical, that it can publish 1 million items in about 15 minutes. So it has a rate of about, sorry for this whole thing, whole mess, has a rate of magical 1,111.11 versions per second. So it's pretty cool. And the items were created by FillDB that Karen just told you about, so everything works together really nicely. So try it out. I really, if you guys have a 32-core physical machine somewhere out there, please, I'm begging you, try it out and set up a clean 7.2, run FillDB to create 1 million, help 10 million items, and just run republish. And this is a republish. This is no smart publish business, just full republish. So please try it out.
Thanks, Alex. That was great. And I definitely love the name icon as well as the backdrop art. It's, it leaves a lot of questions to connect to, but that's what you're for. So next, I think we're going to talk to Martin about some of the search enhancements.
Yes.
Thank you.
So, we'll talk about what we have done in content search, and we have made quite a lot of fixes for starters. Just briefly what Stephen was mentioning, but I would want to highlight to you guys that we have really made quite a lot of fixes for a lot of different things, and that also goes for the Sitecore client, the search box. Different things have been fixed. Parallelization issues and that kind of thing. And actually also for item buckets as well. So definitely, if you are running an earlier version, you should definitely check out the release notes about what we have fixed, and if there's anything that will make your lives easier. Client fixes, we've done. We also fixed a lot of things around the field types, the search field types, and the indexing strategies, and lastly the expression parsing. where certain queries don't behave how you expect them to. We have some fixes in there for you. So, what have we added of new features? We've added some new settings. So, firstly, you can now change out the document builder, which was a bit hidden away before, but now you can actually change it to a custom document builder through the configuration, and you can override how documents are being constructed. You can inject in your own information, pull data from elsewhere if you need, or modify a certain behavior. Also, we have changed our parallelization. Our setting is now called max thread limit instead of I think it was the number of cores, which was a bit of a solar lingo. So now we changed the name to something more fitting. And we've introduced a number of switches that you can use, one for testing, or you can avoid getting errors in your log and getting errors at production. So if an error occurs while we are trying to map to a document, or map to an object, a document to an object, if there's something that's not matching correctly, the data doesn't match the target data type, we can't do that translation. You would just get an error, you would get an exception, and you have no search results at all. So now you can turn this switch off, and it will just skip things. Things are still logged when this happens. As well, during crawling, if something is failing during crawling, that could be computed fields, for example. If you have custom ones that expects certain data to be there and they might not be, it could throw an error. So now we are handling all these situations better, and you can either be told right away or just get it in the logs. And lastly, we have a switch for disabling database caches while indexing as well. And we have one new pipeline, a global filter pipeline that is applied on the iQueryable. So when you call getQueryable, it's being passed through this pipeline before it's returned. And here you can do the normal filtering, and that of course applies to all queries if you implement this. So be careful about it. And there's also a note around this: it only works for search types of search result item. So if you're using your own custom search type, then it doesn't work at this moment. So other new features in update 3, we added or changed how the media indexing is working. So now you can actually include or exclude the indexing based on MIME types or file extensions. So what we have been hearing for some people is that our defaults were to index everything, and suddenly we are trying to index large video files, and well, there might not be that much text content inside a video file other than metadata, which is not that useful anyway. So all these binary files, images, videos, so forth, we are excluding that, and by default we are only including a set of common document files, file types, and that's the Word, Office documents, and PDFs. And it's easy for you to add more file types in here if you have the need for that. Also in update 3, we added support for phrase searches. So if you were to do a query like a title equals and then a string, and if that string contained a phrase, multiple words, then we would have just treated this this string as a single token, a single term, and you would probably not get the right search results. Search back, you could get search results where either of all these tokens within a string it was present, but now we're actually treating it correctly as phrases. So all the search terms need to be in the document. They need to be in order as well. So it's not just that they are present; they have to be in order. And also that comes with a requirement for the configuration as well, that you have to store the terms with the term vectors for this to work. You will actually get an exception if this is not present in the index. Otherwise, we can't figure out if tokens are present next to each other. And all this phrase support that works in equal starts with end with like and match wildcard. You have to remember to turn on term vector offsets in the config if you're upgrading from an earlier version. Stephen was mentioning earlier that we had added Solar HTTP query caching as well to get more performance out of your Solar setup. So that's definitely something you should consider turning on, and that's just as a config switch. And next big feature we have added in 7.2 is a new document object mapper that is much more flexible than the old one. So it supports more scenarios than before. We've changed and optimized the way we are reading the fields of documents and which fields we request out of the index to only those fields that we actually need for to populate an object. We've optimized this code to work better than before. And a completely new component is the object factory, which takes care of constructing the actual type, the result type. So the object mapper hands off the request to the factory for an object to be created, and this means that we are now supporting interfaces. So if you input a type search type in your getQueryable call, if your T is an interface, the object factory can now create an object that implements this interface, and as well for abstract classes, we support that. All this is based around a rule-based object construction. So for this to work, you actually have to tell us that when I mean iProduct, I actually mean product, the product class, or I want the highlighted product class in this case. There's very simple rules like that that you can add into the config. If you're requesting a type like this, then construct this. But we can also construct different types based on the data in the document. So if we have an interface like iProduct here, for normal products, we'll just return the normal product class. But if there is a flag in the document saying this is a highlighted product, we can actually return a new class for you. So you can return a highlighted product or important product or whatever you want to do. So you can act on the data that's in the index and construct different objects out of it. Of course, all these pieces around the object mapper, these are something you can configure. So if you need to modify the behavior of the object factory, or you want to roll your own completely, you can change that out with the config settings. And of course, the entire object mapper as well. That has you had always been able to change the object mapper in config, but now we're actually supporting it at runtime as well. So we have a new execution context that you can use. So if you change the next slide, so we have an override execution context, which you can use to change out settings at runtime. So you can change out the document mapper at runtime. So you can set some defaults in the configuration, but if you have some part in your application where you specifically need some different behavior, you can pass in some execution context through the getQueryable call, and we will pick that up and change that out. So we support changing out the document mapper. We support changing out the document mapper object factory, and the rule set for the object factory as well. So you can change the default of the rules as well, and that's. And lastly, we have some new features in bucketing. And Alex, did you want to go through these?
Yeah, just real quick. There was a couple of enhancements added. First thing, this is again one of the most requested feature for bucketing, is ability to control the way your bucketed repository is structured based on rules. So it's pretty cool. So now there is a special field on the item bucket settings item, which is under system settings buckets, called rules for resolving the bucket folder path. That's how it's called. So where you can create a rule pretty much controlling how to break down the path by ID, date, or a name, say for alphabetical. There's just a few out-of-the-box actions. And conditions, you can, again, extend those, but there is 4 conditions that come out of the box. You can check the ID of the item bucket. You can condition it by the name of the item bucket, template of the item bucket and the template of the item that is about to be bucketed. And you can obviously extend that. This way, you don't have to patch in that setting that controls the resolver sort of class. If you need some sort of custom one, just create a condition, create an action, and there you go. And another thing was sort of just usability item. The bucketing checkbox that is one of the standard fields is exposed in the ribbon right now. So there is under Configure tab, bucketable settings, there are 2 checkboxes controlling bucketable setting on the item and on the standard values of the template. So you can just use those for convenience. You don't have to enable standard fields all the time. That's it.
Awesome.
Cool. So I think before we go, I'll just leave it on that slide. Before we go, probably worth mentioning our next, as we always do, our next hangout. It looks like we're going to aim to get the Speak guys on, so we can all start to learn about some of the other things that come out of Sitecore. And yeah, I guess just put through your requests on Twitter at the hashtag Sitecore7 of what you would want to see in that hangout, because I know the guys have a lot to talk about, but they've got an hour. We can always pad it out to multiple sessions. And of course, I think we also want to do some pretty in-depth stuff on the publishing. And hopefully we have 7.5 coming just around the corner, so we've got lots and lots and lots and lots to talk about with that as well. So, yep. That's it.
Okay. Thank you, gang. Well, this will conclude our Inside Sitecore 7 Session 10, What's New in 7.1 and 7.2. Keep an eye out for the next announcements for the next release, and as Tim mentioned, let us know what you'd like us to talk about, and we will get those questions answered. Thanks again.
Excellent.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Excellent. Cheers.
Bye.